Welcome to my channel, everyone. I'm Mindy, and in today's video, I'm going to be sharing inspiration using the Make Yourself at Home card kit for January 2023. These kits are designed by Hero Arts exclusively for Joann.com. They're available online and also at select Joann stores. I have a few card projects I want to share today using this kit. So first, let's take a look at what's included in the kit. I love that I have this resealable bag so I can put all of my projects in here that I'm working on using the kit. The first thing we have are some Hero Pearls. These are white Hero Pearls. And then you also have 3 ink cubes in Taffy, Fruit Punch, and Green Apple Reactive ink. Then we have the Peonies Bunch 4x6 clear stamp set with this beautiful floral image and sentiments. And there's also a coordinating die to die cut out those smaller images and the large one. There is also this XOXO cover plate to fit the front of our card. And then we have included some cardstock. So you're going to have 2 sheets of each of these. This is Peony, Azalea, and Cherry cardstock. These are all cut to 5.5 by 8.5. And you're also going to receive 2 sheets of watercolor cardstock. And I will be using that watercolor cardstock in my card today. I also love how these kits include this cover sheet. So this is going to tell you exactly what's in the kit, give you some additional ideas, and there are stepped out instructions on the other side to get you started on creating. The first card that I'm going to do is going to be using the image from that Peonies Bunch stamp set. I have a piece of Azalea cardstock cut to 4.25 by 5.5, and what I want to do is stamp this across the top and the bottom of my cardstock. Now, because my stamp kind of extends off of the edge a little bit, I brought in a misty corner to kind of pop my cardstock up off the corner a little bit. I lined up the image along the top side of my cardstock, and I'm inking this up with some Dove White ink from Hero Arts. So this is out of my own stash. If you have something similar, definitely go ahead and use it. You could also use embossing ink to do a watermark look. If you have some white pigment ink, that would work as well, or a darker color of red ink. I stamped that across the top of my cardstock, and now I'm flipping that and I'm going to ink it up again and stamp that down. And I love how this is going to add just some subtle interest to our background. Once I stamp that down, I'm going to take this beautiful background and set it off on the side to dry. I'm going to clean off my stamp, and since I already have this out, I'm going to go ahead and stamp this again. This time I have some just regular 80-pound white cardstock in my Misty, and I'm inking up the image with some Hero Arts intensified black ink. I'm going to stamp it down a couple times to make sure I'm getting a really good impression, really pushing down on some of those areas because it's a very detailed image. I'm going to take this over and die cut it out with the coordinating die included in the kit, and I'm going to place this on the front of the cardstock that I had just created. Now, I love trying to incorporate images without any coloring, so you don't have to feel intimidated by any fancy coloring. You can simply use these images on their own. So I added some foam tape behind my stamped image, and then I'm going to place this kind of off on the left-hand side of the card front. And I really love that bright white and black lines against that bright pink background. I took a sentiment off of the Peonies Bunch stamp set, heat embossed it in gold on that peony cardstock and trimmed it out to a thin strip. And then I'm adding this to the front of the card. So I have a couple foam squares on the right-hand side and then a little bit of liquid glue on the left. So it's going to be flush across the front of my card. A finishing touch to this is going to be taking those white Hero Pearls and adding a few of them around my image. And these are so pretty and just so pearly. They really dress up the front of your card. For my next card, we are going to be creating some backgrounds, and to do this, we're using the ink cubes included in the kit, and we're going to do some ink smushing, which is a really fun technique that you can do. On a slick surface, I am just kind of smushing down that taffy reactive ink, and then I'm going to spray it with water using my water spritz bottle, and I'm taking a piece of that watercolor cardstock that I cut to 4.25 by 5.5, and I'm smushing that down into my ink mixture. So when I pull this up, we have this beautiful natural watercolored background. If I want to add a little more interest to this, I can just take my corners and dab that back into my mixture on that slick surface. I'm going to create one more background. So I wiped away a little bit of that taffy ink and I'm bringing in the fruit punch, adding some water to that. This time I'm also going to wet my background. So this is a wet on wet technique. smush that into my mixture, and pull this up. And now we have a beautiful kind of ombre look going across our background. We have it going from that fruit punch into the taffy, and I really love how that came out and has kind of a wispy look to it. If you want to use these backgrounds right away, you can take your heat tool to speed up the drying process because you want to make sure that these are completely dry. And I'm going to do that a little bit, but then I'm also going to just set them off on the side because I have a few other things that I want to do first. The next thing that I want to show you how to do with your ink cubes is do some loose watercoloring. So I'm going to bring in a panel of watercolor cardstock cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. I prepped that with an anti-static powder tool, and now this time I am using some black pigment ink from Hero Arts. I'm going to ink my stamp up really well with that and stamp that down. Because this is a textured surface, I am going to stamp it a couple times to make sure I'm getting all the detail. Now, the reason I'm using kind of this pigment ink is I want to add some clear embossing powder over the top. So I wanted to have these black lines, and I wanted to have the barrier that the embossing creates. And with pigment ink, it stays wet a little bit longer and allows me to do the heat embossing. So I'm stamping that down once again, and then I'm going to take this over and I am going to sprinkle on some clear embossing powder. You could also use black embossing powder if you wanted to use embossing ink, but I find with black embossing powder, I get a lot of black speckles, and this technique works out really well. You're going to be able to tell if you have all your areas covered because wherever that clear embossing powder is, it's going to look cloudy. So then once we warm up our heat tool and we melt that embossing powder, you're going to see how those lines turn into this beautiful shiny black. So now I have all these barriers created so I can do some watercoloring with it. I am taking my slick surface once again and kind of smushing down some of the taffy ink, and then I'm also going to bring in the green apple. I'm going to spritz down a little bit of water up in the top corner there, and I'm just going to use a water brush to kind of get that wet, pick up the water, and then bring that over to the ink that I smushed down, and then just kind of come in and scribble over the areas. I'm calling this loose watercoloring because I don't really mind if it gets outside of the lines. I plan on die cutting it anyways, so those lines are not going to matter if it gets out. I'm just going to try and keep it away from my leaves. Now, the more water you add to your brush, the lighter that color is going to be. So for some of the flowers, I picked up a lot of color, but little water, which is going to make them darker. And other areas, I added more water to it to make it a lighter color. I'm going to clean off my water brush, and then I'm going to do the same thing with the green. Now you want to make sure your brush is really clean because we don't want the pink and green to mix. It's not going to give us a good color. So make sure your water brush is really clean. And then we can pick up that mixture and apply it to the leaves. You also want to make sure that the areas you color the flowers with the pink is fairly dry because otherwise those colors will mix together. So I'm going to give this a few minutes to dry, and then I'm going to use the coordinating die to die cut this out. So I planned on using this with one of my watercolor backgrounds that I created, but I wanted to frame the image or frame that background a little more. So I'm using a rectangle die, one of the smaller sizes, and adding that to a piece of white cardstock to cut out this thick white frame. This is one of my go-to techniques when I want to kind of rein in a background and I don't want it to overpower the image. Now I want to stamp my sentiment directly onto the background, so I placed the background and also the frame in my MISTI tool, placed my floral arrangement where it's going to go, and then I can line up my sentiment. Now, I really should have removed my rectangle frame, but I didn't. I forgot to. So I'm just being careful not to get any black ink smudges anywhere. And I'm inking the sentiment up multiple times to get a good impression because remember that cardstock is textured. I want to create a little separation and dimension. So I'm adding some foam tape behind my frame, and then I'm using a craft pick to remove the backing of that foam tape. And I'm going to line that up over the background, kind of starting down in the bottom left-hand corner. If there's anything overhanging because I didn't line it up very well, I can trim that out later with my scissors. I just want to make sure that I'm not overlapping my sentiment. After I push this down really well, then I can take the scissors and kind of trim off that little bit of excess. Now I'm going to add my floral image over the top. So I added foam tape over the areas that are going to be inside of the frame, and the rest of the areas that are going to hang over the edge of the frame, I'm going to add some liquid glue to. So I have a little bit of dimension to go with that, and everything is flush across the top of the card once again. So that will finish off my second card project, and I have one more to share with you, and this time I'll be using the cover plate included in that kit. With the cover plate die, I'm going to be using a piece of peony cardstock cut to 4 1/4 by 5 1/2. So I'm lining that cover plate kind of in the center, making sure my margins are even all around the edge of the cardstock. I'll hold that down with Post-it tape and die cut that out, and then I'm going to pop out all of these X's and O's. So you can save these to use on another card. I won't be using them today. I'm just going to use this front piece. I'm lining the back of this, going around all the edges with some double-sided tape, and I'm also going to add some of that to the center. I'm going to be placing a piece of acetate over this because I'm going to be creating a shaker card. So I want to make sure that everything is secured down to the acetate. So I removed the backing of all of that double-sided tape, added my acetate sheet over the top, and then trimming off the excess. And now I'm going to be adding foam tape behind this because this is where I want to create a well for my shaker bits. Thin foam tape works really good for this, but I have some thicker ones, so I had to cut it into some small strips myself. I'm going all the way around the edge of my card, and I'm also adding a little bit in the middle there so that it gives me some support in the center of my card. Now I'm taking some shaker mix from Hero Arts, and I'm going to add that all around. Now with shaker cards, you really want to do 2 layers of foam tape. I'm only doing 1 right now. And what I'm doing is just making sure none of that sequence is on top of each other. I want it to really be spread out. Before I remove the backing of my foam tape, I'm going to secure my corners down to my work surface using some masking tape or Post-it tape. That way my cardstock isn't going to kind of curl up on me. So I'm removing all of the backing of that foam tape, making sure none of my sequins are piled up on top of each other. And then I can take my background, I'm lining it up with that bottom left-hand corner, and then just kind of slowly pressing down and then smoothing over that surface to make sure it's secured down really well. Off screen, I created my sentiment by heat embossing one off of that Peonies Bunch stamp set. I did this on some azalea cardstock using some gold embossing powder to match the gold in my shaker card. I added some white foam squares behind the back, and then I'm going to place this over the front of my card. And that finishes off card number 3. So I had a lot of fun playing with this kit, and I hope you enjoyed the inspiration that I provided, kind of 3 different ways of using the contents of the kit. And just remember that these kits are exclusive at Joann.com and also in some select Joann stores. Let me know down in the comments which card is your favorite. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I'll see you again real soon.